everybody, and welcome to Late Night in Canada. I'm your host, Clare Blackwood. You might have noticed that I didn't have a show last week, and while I would love to tell you that it's because my prediction came true and Tom Hiddleston took me to court for slander in the form of the world's greatest Photoshop, I can't, because it hasn't happened. Yet. No, the real reason for my week off was much more serious. You see, I was minding my own business last week, scrolling through the abominable hellscape known as Twitter.com, when what to my wondering eyes did appear, but not one, but two of our major political parties making absolute fools of themselves for the internet to see. First up, the NDP posted a picture of the official itinerary for President Biden's first conversation with Justin Trudeau that had been mocked up with what I have to assume the NDP social media team thought were jokes, assuming the NDP social media team is a group of 13-year-old Reddit dweebs. And before I had time to mentally recover from that, then came a video of Conservative leader Erin O'Toole pointing to a porta potty and declaring it Justin Trudeau's next home. And I had a rage stroke, blacked out, and came to a week later covered in the crumbs of what used to be a democracy that respected itself. At this point, I can only assume that Trudeau's team is days away from releasing a Weird Al-type parody of the national anthem dedicated to O'Toole and Singh's mothers, called Ho Canada, because that is apparently what passes for political discourse in this day and age. But I am not going to get angry again, because if I do, how will I tell you about what happened this week? And that is a segue into This Week in the North. On Monday, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, seen here insisting that Inception only works if you're inside the dreamer's mind, stated that the U.S. will not be sending any vaccines to Canada before every American has been vaccinated. But Mom, come on, can we just have like a few vaccines? Dad is so lame and he won't let us have any at home. He says it's going to be like 6 months. Ugh, this is so embarrassing. I'm going to my room. I was a perfect child, so that was an approximation of a teenager throwing a tantrum. Do not follow up with my parents on this. Also on Monday, the Toronto Star announced that it will be launching an online casino to help fund its journalism, with a gaming consultant stating that Torstar is looking at diversifying the revenue model of how we fund and pay for reporters, columnists, and editorial staff. Finally, a chance to support the dying print media industry by developing a crippling gambling addiction. Even more exciting is the announcement that the Toronto Star's paywall will be replaced by two goons named Alonzo, who came to chew gum and break bones, and they just accidentally swallowed their gum because they forgot it was in their mouths. On Tuesday, Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro announced that under Step 2 of the province's reopening plan, gyms would not only be allowed to reopen, but would be in charge of deciding what constitutes safe indoor fitness activities. Only low-intensity activities will be allowed, and when asked for clarification, Shandro explained,
here's how I interpret it. If you're out of breath, it's high intensity. If you're not out of breath, it's low intensity.
Excuse me? Speak for yourself. I get out of breath by simply looking at moderately inclined stairs. But we all know that money is going to get in the way of safe decisions. Letting gym owners decide what's allowed in order to bring their clients back is like putting lions in charge of zoo safety. Great for the lions, terrible for me, trying to escape the lions by running up moderately inclined stairs. As Ontario adults aged 80 and over become the next group slotted to get the vaccine, the City of Toronto announced that it will be spending an unspecified amount of money to buy 2 million pink Band-Aid stickers and erecting selfie stations at vaccination clinics as part of its plan to spread the word about the safety of COVID-19 vaccines. Neat, say the city's 10,000 homeless. But you know what? I actually think this is a great idea. I mean, if there's any age group that's known for social media literacy, it's 80-year-olds. But why stop with selfies? Come on, Grandma, we're going to get your second dose of the Pfizer vaccine. But first, you have to part your hair down the middle, do a viral TikTok dance, and say the secret password, dummy thick. I had to look all of that up. On Wednesday, one day after President Biden stated that every American will be vaccinated by the end of May, Justin Trudeau announced that his projected deadlines for getting all Canadians vaccinated by September could be moved up if a few changes to the rollout plan are made. Now, listen, I'm all for a little healthy competition, but the fact that Trudeau made the announcement wearing an "It's on, Joe" t-shirt before challenging the president to a shirtless push-up battle is, quite frankly, embarrassing. On Thursday, it was revealed that the average price of a Toronto house had officially surpassed $1 million. For those in the market, here is a picture of that house. Now, look, you might think I'm joking, but this garage just went on the market for $729,000. So basically, money means nothing anymore. I'm starting a commune, and the entry fee is a promise to take care of my cats when I die. We got some good news on Friday. I know, I don't know how to handle it either. As Health Canada approved a new COVID-19 vaccine from Johnson & Johnson. It's the first approved single-dose vaccine, can be stored at non-sub-zero temperatures, and while its efficacy rate is lower than the others, it has still proved extremely effective against the variants and at preventing serious illness, hospitalization, and death. You know what? I don't want to make a joke about this. It would just be so great to leave the weekly roundup on a high note for once. I really need that. So as long as we don't hear anything ridiculous like leaders rejecting the vaccine because it's not quite as good as the others, we should be good to move on to...
Johnson & Johnson is a very good vaccine. Moderna and Pfizer are the best. And I am going to do everything I can to make sure the residents of the city of Detroit get the best.
That was Mayor Duggan on Wednesday explaining why the city of Detroit turned away 6,200 Johnson & Johnson vaccines.
One of the biggest stories to hit Toronto in the last month has been that of Khalil Seavright, a local carpenter who began building tiny wooden shelters for the homeless last fall after realizing that the upcoming winter season mixed with the COVID-19 pandemic would undoubtedly be a deadly combination. Seavright was recently hit with an injunction from the City of Toronto in order to stop making his shelters, causing protests against what many Torontonians are calling yet another senseless act against the homeless in a city already rife with housing problems. I'm going to take a look at what happened, the state of Toronto's shelter system, and how it can be improved in this week's The Focus. Shelter. One of the most important parts of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, something most of us take for granted, and what every single survivor tribe inevitably fucks up on the very first day. No, Janine, you don't lay the palm fronds parallel. They have to crisscross, or else you and your tribe are going to be wet and miserable come the monsoon season in episode 4. God, have you learned nothing from the last 400 seasons, Janine? What is wrong with you? Let me just say that right off the bat, you know Toronto has a problem when a thoughtful man uses his own money, skills, and time to build shelters for homeless people, and instead of helping him make them safer or offering to put his skills to better, more legal use, the city basically says, "Fuck your kindness, you rule-breaking piece of shit. Here's a lawsuit and we hope you choke on it." And to those who say, "Okay, Claire, that's a little harsh," let it be known that I do not care. But sure, let's put emotions aside for a minute and look at the facts. Khalil's structure had fiberglass insulation, a fire alarm, a carbon monoxide detector, and locks, costing almost $1,000 to make each. He quickly began receiving more than $200,000 in donations before being ordered to stop, with support pouring in from everybody but city officials. The tiny shelters were deemed illegal dwellings, as a Toronto bylaw prohibits placing both tents and structures on city property. The city stated that it had serious safety concerns with these structures, and on February 17th, one person died from a fire that involved the small wooden structure. That's terrible. However, it has to be said that that structure has not yet been identified as one of Seavright's tiny shelters.
I've appealed to City Council, I've appealed to the Mayor. They have declared these structures fire hazards without actually doing any sort of inspection on them and communicating with them and asking them to come and get Toronto Fire Department to come and do an inspection on them so that we can move forward to work together.
The city insists that the chance of fire poses a significant danger to the homeless in these encampments. But you know what else poses a danger? Sleeping outside in a Canadian winter without any walls. Look, I don't like going outside at all in the winter. The one good thing this god-awful pandemic has brought me is the excuse to literally never leave my house. My cat is so sick of me that I'm absolutely certain he's planning my death. Last night, he stared at me like this for half an hour, and I was so afraid to turn my back on him that I missed the last half of the WandaVision finale. If you spoil it for me, Gandalf will kill you, because I will tell him to. Residents of the tiny houses have described them as lifesavers, stating that without them, people would be dropping left, right, and center. That is a horrifying image. Seafright is actively pleading with the city to cease its injunction, and an online petition in his support currently has almost 100,000 signatures. On the morning of February 28th, more than 1,000 people waited outside Mayor John Tory's condo in a protest organized by the Encampment Support Network to fight against Seafright's injunction. Do you know how shitty your decisions have to be to get Torontonians out of the house on a Sunday morning? We are all hungover and brunch is very important to us. When your people hate you more than they love brunch, you know you done fucked up. Mr. Mayor, this man is literally doing your job. Instead of spending money to stop him from building homeless shelters like the world's shittiest Batman villain, maybe put that money towards helping him make his shelters safer and more available. As Khalil puts it,
instead of working with me, the city sued to stop me from building and relocating the tiny shelters. This is only a distraction. The problem is not the tiny shelters. The problem is that Toronto's most vulnerable people are falling through the cracks.
Exactly. He means these as a temporary solution. Nobody wants to live in a tiny box in the park. Unless, of course, you're the world's poshest squirrel who thinks he's too good for trees. You're not, Mr. Nutterbutter. Your tree is just fine. Get back to your hole. Get back to your hole, Mr. Nutterbutter. So, fine. If tiny shelters aren't legal and tent cities aren't legal, what exactly is the current state of Toronto's shelter system? The system is comprised of over 100 sites with a total staff of around 700 and about 6,000 people staying in them each night, many of whom are members of disadvantaged or minority groups like Black, Indigenous, and the mentally and physically disabled. Shelters have been dealing with overcrowded problems for years, and yet a press release by the City of Toronto at the end of last year boasted that Toronto has the largest shelter system in Canada and is a leader in supporting those experiencing homelessness. Cool. Just one little issue. Homelessness in Toronto is only getting worse. Right now, more than 10,000 people are living without access to housing, a number that has increased due to the pandemic. It's great to say that you have the largest shelter system, but if 10,000 people are still suffering, those are some pretty bullshit laurels to rest on. If your Tinder date says, I don't want to brag, but my doctor told me that I logged the largest amount of STI tests of anyone in Canada, you would be correct and running very far away. Last fall, the Ontario Superior Court of Justice stated that the city has taken many steps in its shelter system to respond to COVID-19 and is dedicated to helping anyone who wants to come inside. Now, let's be clear here. There is a vast difference between helping anyone who wants to come inside and acknowledging that sometimes coming inside sucks a lot more than sleeping in a city park. If you were stranded in the rain and someone said to you, hey, there's a bus shelter right over there. I mean, it's full of snakes, but at least you won't get wet. There's a solid chance you're going to stay right where you are, especially if you're Indiana Jones. I don't know why you would be, but a girl can dream. Shelters have been proven to be hotbeds for both COVID-19 outbreaks and rising amounts of violence. So if you choose a tent or a small wooden structure where you can have privacy, physical distancing, and the safety from the elements, no one should blame you. And if people are actively choosing to sleep outside over the city shelters, then we have a moral obligation to ask why. Now, besides overcrowding, outbreaks, and the threat of violence, the sheltered spaces that homeless people are offered are often far from their communities, networks, and social services like social workers, overdose prevention sites, pharmacies, and doctors. And that last point is particularly important, given that a study published by the Canadian Medical Association Journal stated that homeless individuals are over 20 times more likely to be hospitalized for COVID-19 and were over 5 times more likely to die within 21 days of a positive test. Now, Toronto has been expanding affordable housing options, but that takes time, and time is something that you don't have if you're homeless during a pandemic winter. The Toronto Star reported that men's emergency shelters on the night of February 21st, 2021 were at 99.7% capacity, women's emergency shelters were at 99.1%, mixed adult emergency sites at 87.4%, and 24-hour respite sites across the city were at 98.9%. It's never good news if your shelter occupancy numbers could get into Harvard Law. Pair that with a 12-year waitlist for a one-bedroom apartment in subsidized housing, the upswing in violent assaults and COVID outbreaks within shelters, and the fact that last year 74 shelter residents died in what was the worst year on record, and you have more than enough grounds to question just what the fuck the city is actually doing. So what is it doing? Well, not spending nearly enough money on the problem, that's for sure. Toronto opened over 40 additional shelter sites during the pandemic in order to accommodate the system's overflow. In late February, the city leased the Novotel Toronto Centre Hotel as a temporary homeless shelter. In 2021, Toronto hopes to make over 1,200 new housing opportunities, and this week, Toronto's homeless began being prioritized for the COVID-19 vaccine, which is great. But we still need so much more affordable and transitionary housing, especially the type that doesn't discriminate against those suffering from addiction issues. Look, if you tell someone, sure, you can have an apartment, as long as you don't have any mental health issues, criminal tendencies, or addictions, you are completely missing the point. It is so much easier to address problems with mental health and addiction if your client hasn't been sleeping under a bench for the last 3 years. Safe and affordable housing should be seen as a right, not something you get depending on whether or not you've been a good boy this past year. Our system shouldn't be acting like a condescending Santa Claus. Good job, Robert. You haven't had a drink in a month despite the fact that you lost your family, your job, your health, and have been living on the streets. Here's 4 walls and a roof. But if you screw up, you're getting nothing but coal. The issue of shelter and housing has to be tackled from multiple angles. We need to be opening up unused community centers and office spaces as temporary housing, transforming more vacant hotels into spaces where people can go, and providing better access to free mental health care and addiction services. And when it comes to people like Khalil, we need to work with them, not against them. There is so much more to do and so much more federal and provincial financial support needed, but hey, at least we'll have fun Band-Aid stickers and selfie stations. These are complicated issues, and I will be the first to admit that I've barely scratched the surface. If you want more information or to donate to their various causes, you can follow the Encampment Support Network Toronto on Twitter at ENS_TO and Toronto Tiny Shelters at TOR Tiny Shelters. I also urge you to contact your local MPPs and city councillors and ask them to put pressure on the provincial government to not only put much needed pandemic response money towards affordable housing, but to look at and fund long-term solutions for homelessness as opposed to, well, Band-Aid solutions. And as for the future of Khalil's tiny shelters, I'll let him take us out.
We need to work together to support our vulnerable residents. The City of Toronto should drop its application against me and focus its resources and efforts on what matters, getting people safely housed. I hope there will be a day that the tiny shelters are no longer needed, but that day has not yet come.
This has been The Focus. My first guest tonight is the amazing Sharron Matthews, singer, cabaret queen, and actor you might recognize from Mean Girls and Flo in Frankie Drake Mysteries. We chatted about her career, what she'll be taking away from Frankie Drake, and dealing with the harsher realities of the film industry. Take a look.
This wasn't here this morning. It must have fallen off Jack Parks' hand when they brought him in. To my beloved husband, love, Ingrid.
Oh, Flo, it's his wedding ring.
I gotta return it.
Well, absolutely. His wife will want a keepsake of her lost love.
Funny, the brother didn't mention a wife. 125 Rush Home Road. Fancy a tram ride?
Yes?
Hello, Sharron. It's so nice to see you.
It is so nice to see you too. You have some lovely colors behind you.
Thank you. I just, you know what? I made the rainbow explode over, just exploded over my apartment when I moved in because I need color.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Look at me.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. Yes, it's the redhead thing.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for coming on Late Night in Canada. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me. The sun is just coming out and giving me beautiful, beautiful light.
Oh, amazing. I'm just getting beautiful roots. So don't
Aren't we
tell
all?
anyone.
There we go. I'll put that on. There we go.
So it's been a while. I was thinking, I was like, you were one of my teachers at the Theater Aquarius summer program like 2,000 years ago, I think, for both of us. I think you've done some stuff since then.
Yeah, it was, what did you say it was? Was it 2009? What year was it?
It must have been 2009, 2008.
Crap balls. Yeah. Yeah. That was actually, I would say that was the summer. That was the summer when everything started to fall into place for me, honestly.
Really?
Yeah, it was just, I don't know. I think we worked so hard to make everything like to fit the square peg in the round hole. And I feel like I kind of, and I could be wrong, I feel like I kind of laid back and let myself be. I worked hard, but I let myself be, and everything just started to kind of fall into place.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then, you're a cabaret queen, you're a TV star, all of that kind of stuff, NBD. So, well, I mean, to get on that, first off, I want to start with saying congratulations on the success of Frankie Drake Mysteries.
Thank you. I don't know if you know, but we just got canceled.
I did know that, and I was going to further up and say,
sorry about that.
So sorry to hear about that. But, you had 4 amazing seasons.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How are you feeling?
It's really, it's kind of amazing in many ways to be 52, which I am. I'm 52 years old. And I remember when Canada Sings, and that would have been 2010. When Canada Sings, I did that for 2 seasons. And it was so successful. I was so sure we were going to get a 3rd season. And then Global gave all the money to Big Brother Canada, which has turned out badly for them.
Yeah.
Like it's turned out really well. And I was devastated. Like grade 12, high school plays over, have to go back to being with normal people and not your theater people. Devastated. And then I started to, that was the year I started to really get good at, better anyway, at letting go. Yeah. Because we have so many, I've said this in a number of little things over the last couple of days, we have so many beginnings in our business and so many endings. We meet so many people and move on that I've really learned to like soak up the middle. And I soaked up every moment of Frankie Drake, the friendships, the people I got to work with, writing on the show, executive producing and co-writing a spin-off with the animated show that I'm on.
We're going to talk about all of that.
Yeah. And so I feel I'm really happy to say I feel sad. And I feel proud, and I don't feel devastated. Mm-hmm. I just know that it's run its course, and we told some great stories, and we didn't end on a low note. We're actually number 2 in the ratings.
Amazing.
I don't know why anyone does anything. Not for me to know. We actually had
the motto for my life. Why does anyone do anything?
Well, and that's the thing. That's when you start getting a lot of the people, and a lot of the really great fans are like, oh, why did they cancel it? I'm like, why does anyone do anything? We don't know. We don't know the machinations that have happened. All I know is that we finished strong. We didn't finish crappily, as it were. That is the really long answer to your question.
No, and I think that's so important to end on your own terms. And I think, as artists, we always are aware, and we always have this, I think this intrinsic fear of this will be my last gig, and then this gig will be over, and then there will be nothing else. And I think if you can kind of just let that go and just be like, well, we did it, and it was great, and I appreciate it for what it was. So, like, what do you think will be at the end of the day? What do you think your biggest takeaway from doing this show will be?
Oh, you know what? My biggest takeaway, these are great. Claire, I want to say in the middle of this so you can't edit it out. I enjoy your Twitter account so much. I think I wrote you, and I was like, whenever I'm feeling a little bit down, I go and look because it's so absurd that I enjoy it so much. Anyway, don't edit that out. I'll be angry.
I promise I won't edit it.
Okay, great. My biggest takeaway is to believe in myself. It's amazing that I think we spend a whole lifetime, and some people go into the next world not believing in themselves. And I was so nervous when I started Frankie, like beyond the pale. I mean, I remember auditioning for it, and I did a self-tape when I was in New York. And I remember reading like all the dialogue and all the doctor speak and going, I hope I never get this. Like, I hope I don't get this. Like, because then you're like, oh God, now I've got 4 years of doctor speak. But, and then I got it. And then I was so excited and so nervous. I remember when I got my package and it said number 4, and anyone who does TV and film, it's like, it's a bit of a caste system. Like if you're number 1 on the call sheet, you're like, I was like number 4. I was like, oh my God, I think the highest I've ever been is like 36. And that was probably accidental. So I remember being like, oh my God, there's so much pressure. But at some point during the first like month of work, I really started to believe in myself. And then the job became joyous.
Yeah.
And I will take away, because I get sometimes when I start to learn something and do a self-tape or do an audition or do a first day of work, I always get so stressed out can I swear in here?
Oh God, fuck yeah.
If I fuck stuff up, I always get like, it's like, oh, it's the end of the world. And it's like,
yeah.
No, it's like, if you believe in yourself, you believe that you will surmount fuck ups.
Yeah.
And even if you have a fucking day that's just like, one of the girls on the show talked about a day that she had on a major TV show in the States where she was really ill, and she literally, they told her a line and she couldn't remember it 2 seconds later. And she said it was literally one of the worst days of her life, and here we are.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, so I would take away that I need to remind myself to believe in my abilities as a human.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such a wonderful answer. And I think it kind of ties into a point that I wanted to talk to you about, which is, I mean, you're obviously a little bit of an idol, and for so many reasons. No, but like honestly, in terms of, you're very open and you're very funny and you're very vocal about things that the industry is often really terrible with, like body image and body advocacy and ageism, especially for women. And I think as women, we still kind of get hit with that pervasive, like, well, doll, if you haven't made it by 30, and so like, you and your daily social media affirmations are just such a breath of fresh air. So I mean, like, where do you tell me your secrets? Like oh my God, it's wonderful.
Well, I really think that you got to walk the walk to talk the talk. I mean, sometimes I put things up to help myself feel better about how I feel that day. I think I literally just got to a point when I was about 35 years old when I realized that theater was only going to let me play the wacky aunt, the best friend, the crazy neighbor, old hooker.
I get young hooker.
Older hooker.
Young hooker, yay!
Like a real old hooker. and I was just like, I gotta forge my own path. Like, if I want to keep working, if I want a life that's bigger than the life that theater has planned for me in many ways, I mean, and I just mean, I didn't know I could write.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know I was allowed to write. I didn't know you were allowed to do many, many things. And so I think that, and then I just started to be like, why can't I be? Because I've been many weights in my life. And times when I've been most successful is when I've been bigger. Always most successful when I'm bigger. And I'm really healthy, and I work out every day, and I eat really well, and no one needs to know why I'm the size I am, and it's none of their fucking business. I love that I still didn't want to say fuck.
Yeah,
anyway.
I know.
But I really want to be, when I hit the slab, I want to have really tried my hardest to be the best I can be at whatever I'm doing. Friendship, as a writer, as a sister, as a niece, as all those things. And so I just wake up every day, and every day I'm not totally successful, but I just try really hard. It's funny, someone put up, there was this writer named Amanda Richards, I think her name is. She works for InStyle magazine, and last night she put up this, I have to read it if I can find it. I know that but she put up this tweet, and I slept on it because I wasn't going to say anything. And then I got angry. But she wrote, where is it here? Oh, here it is. She wrote, this is about the Golden Globes. And that beautiful Nicola Coughlin, Nicola Coughlin, who from Dairy Girls.
Right.
The fat girl from Bridgerton is wearing a black cardigan at the Golden Globes because no matter how hot and stylish you are, if you're a fat girl, there will always be a black cardigan you think about wearing and decide against, but ultimately wear because you feel you have to. And sometimes I think we suffer judging ourselves through judging other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if she says that I guess she says that she's a big girl. I don't know if she is. I haven't seen a full picture of her, but Nicola Coughlan wrote, I thought that the cardigan looked ace. Molly Goddard used them on her runway with dresses, and that's where the idea came from. I also have a name. And I just think that when we start reducing anyone to the most obvious thing about them,
yeah,
like if you're fat, if you start going around saying she's fat and she's been minimized when the person hasn't been minimized at all, like the more we make ourselves small, the longer it will take for people to say, disabled people aren't worthy, autistic people aren't worthy, big people aren't worthy. I'm not saying we're all the same, that's all in the same place, but I just think they'll never be able to see our brilliance till we accept ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And I know how woo-woo that sounds, but some people think it's woo-woo, but I have to say it's really changed my life. So again, this is the answer to your I mean, you're not going to get to ask me about anything. I'm just fucking talking. But I get up every day and make a really concerted effort to be positive.
Well, thank you for doing that, because it does trickle down, and it is inspirational for those of us, like I'm in my 30s and I feel like I'm just starting.
You are.
To develop things. And whereas, when you graduate theater school, you're like, well, if by 30, I'll have done all of these things. And now I get to, we get to look at you on screen as a woman in her 50s, like a large woman in her 50s on billboards in Toronto. And you're like, yes. Oh, cool. Okay, we can do that.
But how does it make sense that you get better as you get older? That's what makes me crazy when people are like, this emerging artists are only 20. I'm like, there are so many emerging artists I know who are like 60 and 70. Anyway.
Yeah. So, okay, I have time for one more question.
Oh my gosh, okay.
And so—
Choose well, Claire, choose well.
God. So you just recently wrote a cabaret episode of Frankie Drake with Tom Allison. And I mean, how is that for you? How was that process? Was that the most fun, or like the most fun?
It was, the whole process was exciting, amazing, terrifying, hard. Oh my God, how are we going to reduce 18 pages from an 80-page script? Yep. What songs are there going to be? I want them to, I hope they cast Tom. They'll cast Tom. I believe they'll cast Tom. Tom, it's going to be great when so-and-so plays that role. No, they're going to cast you. Oh my God, we're doing it. Tom gets cast. Sarah Farb gets cast. Steve Cumming gets cast.
It was wonderful.
Irene Poole gets cast. It was just all these people that we were like, we wanted theater people.
Yeah.
And the whole thing from beginning to end, and Bosite Williams was a director, and she was so loving with it, and she was so aware of how important it was to us and to me, and the girls on set were just like, oh,
that's wonderful.
Literally best experience of my life.
Well, congratulations. That's amazing. I was so proud because that doesn't happen very often, that people get to write for the shows that they are on. And so it was a wonderful episode. I encourage everybody to watch Frankie Drake. If you haven't already, pick it up. It's a great show. Sharron, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh my gosh, that was so fast. Thank you so much for having me. And you, again, you are so great. Keep fucking plowing. Keep plowing.
Yes, thank you.
My second guest tonight is my first repeat guest, my wonderful MPP Dr. Jill Andrew. She asked if she could come back to talk about her new motion concerning intersectional gender equity for International Women's Day and how the first Eating Disorders Awareness Week went. And I couldn't say no.
Hello, Jill.
Hello, Claire. How are you?
I'm well. I am so thrilled to have you back here. I remember our last interview, you sent me an email and you're like, I'd love to come back for International Women's Day. And I was so excited because I was like, oh my gosh, my first guest liked me. I am good. And
like, I loved you. I loved you. It was like talking to a BFF. I loved it.
Cat moms are BFFs all the time. So basically, I'm so excited to talk to you about this because the main reason you're here today is to tell everybody about a new motion that you've introduced called Motion 89, which calls on the government of Ontario to adopt what you are calling a provincial intersectional gender equity strategy. So I would love you to tell me more about that, because that is a lot of words.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So
It's quite wordy, and it's not a dance move. I think Motion 89 sounds like a great dance move. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I can't dance.
Really what it was is I actually tabled this back in December of 2019, long before COVID-19, because as a new MPP, I recognized that we really need to create legislation. You know, the government should be creating legislation, motions, anything at all that we do at Queen's Park should be done through a gender lens and through an intersectional lens, one that recognizes that, you know, certain groups in our communities are impacted more and usually more negatively by legislation than other groups. So for instance, you know, now we're at COVID-19 and we're seeing that, you know, many of our essential care workers, our frontline healthcare workers are women. Yet we have a government that refuses to offer paid sick days or paid family care leave. You know what I mean? So here's a piece of legislation that if it was looked at through an intersectional gender equity lens, the government would realize before putting forth that kind of legislation that it's detrimental to predominantly women's lives and BIPOC community members' lives and those who are already made marginalized by all kinds of systemic, you know, forms of discrimination that they deal with on a daily basis, let alone during a pandemic. So
I was going to say the pandemic has definitely exacerbated all of those issues.
This is it. So I mean, you know, whether we're talking housing, and I mean, we had a housing crisis before the pandemic. You know, affordable housing in Toronto is like a unicorn, right?
I actually am. That was my subject for today's show is the shelter system and affordable housing. So yeah, exactly. Learned a lot about that.
Well, this is it. And I mean, we know in Ontario that, you know, 80% of sole parent households are headed by women, you know? So it's about time that we have a government that is responsive to the realities of the communities they serve. And that means let's make sure that every piece of legislation, every motion, every bill, every idea that we're discussing at Queen's Park is done so, you know, with an eye for intersectionality, with an eye for gender equity. You know, because we know that these are long-standing issues, long before I got into politics. But I think that it's the time. Now's the time. Now's the time for us to focus and ensure that the people who are, you know, at the end of the line are first considered. And, you know, women are a big part of that. BIPOC communities are a big part of that. People with disabilities are a big part of that. I mean, so many women here in St. Paul's, whether ODSP or OW, are barely surviving. They were barely surviving, you know, on those small pittance of dollars they were getting before the pandemic, let alone now when food insecurity has risen its ugly head, you know, where people have had, you know, threats with evictions during a pandemic. So all of these sorts of pieces, you know, if we're putting forth policy at Queen's Park that focuses on gender, on race, on class, you know, focuses on making the world more accessible. You know, these are good things that we need to do and we can do them. And the government has the power to simply say, you know, Jill, good idea. Let's put Motion 89 into motion. They can do that if they want to. So we need them to do that. We need them to do that and we need it now.
Absolutely. And like, do you have an update or like any information on the status of the bill, or are we just kind of waiting?
Well, right now what we're doing is, you know, we're still sort of waiting to see whether or not the government will jump on that motion. I have certainly called in the Associate Minister for Women's Issues, Jill Dunlop, and said, hey, you know, let's pass my motion. You know, we don't need to debate this for many moons on end. We know that women are on the short receiving end of many things across Ontario. So why don't we just try to put some legislation together at Queen's Park that's going to help make women's lives better, especially now during a pandemic where whether it's essential workers, frontline healthcare workers, education workers, you know, the person at our local convenience store, disproportionately we're seeing that these are held by women identified people.
Yeah, and I was going to say, especially because we are getting closer to what people are kind of calling the return to normal, and normal sucked, like on so many levels. So I mean,
this is it.
Yeah, so before we can go back and kind of rest on those laurels, I think this is super important. So I wish you all the best with that motion.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, pay equity would be a nice gift.
What? That'd be nice. Actually, the other thing I was just very curious about is the last time you were on, you were here to tell me about your Eating Disorders Awareness Week, which had just been passed. So the first one happened, like, I think it was like the week that your episode came out. So how did that go?
Yeah, oh my goodness. Well, I must say it was a wonderful opportunity to bring together dozens of folks, you know, from here in St. Paul's to across the province. Actually, we had people who were survivors of eating disorders, people who were, you know, essential caregivers. We had a whole host of health professionals and scholars and activists in this work. And we also had the pleasure of having the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addiction. He actually joined us and sat and listened. I was very impressed by his willingness to listen. And we heard some really important pieces around, you know, chronic underfunding to eating disorders clinics, to research, you know, and of course, if we're underfunded in research, that means we're not cutting edge. You know, we can't provide the kind of culturally relevant, diverse, you know, we can't provide the quantity of supports we need to give folks in Ontario. And I mean, right here in Ontario, we know, you know, that about 500,000 folks are struggling with EDs, you know, so we really need to create an environment where folks aren't struggling, but they feel that they have access to resources that are nearby. You know, what we don't need is Ontarians having to travel out of country. You know, young people, children, women and girls, trans community members, BIPOC community members, BAC members, anybody can get an eating disorder. They do not discriminate, but we need the services here in Ontario because all too often people have to travel or there's really, really, really long wait lists. And what happens is people die. They die waiting, you know? So with more funding, with more of a government eye on this as a healthcare issue, as a mental health care issue, and also as a gendered issue. Because let's face it, although EDs impact everyone, we do live in a very, you know, sexist, patriarchal world where visual culture, you know, it really is all about how you look as opposed to who you are. And while we know that EDs have a biological genetic base, we also know that, you know, nurture, culture around us has a lot to do with developing EDs. So we know that it is still a very gendered occurrence, and we need to nip it in the bud. And that means more funding, more government support, more government awareness.
Yeah.
Folks aren't waiting and twisting in the wind, so to speak, for care. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm happy that you had those successes, and I feel like you can kind of only just build on them for next year.
Absolutely. Build, 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 you know, build. Pardon?
I said, build, build, build.
Yes, build, build, build.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations. You are working so hard to make this in the community, and I think we're all very lucky to have you. Is there anything else that you'd like to kind of plug while you're here, or?
Oh my goodness. Well, I would like to say happy International Women's Day in advance. I'd like to say that. I think International Women's Day is every day, quite frankly. And we have to just keep fighting. We got to keep fighting for gender equity. We got to keep fighting for pay equity. You know, for me, a big part of that is, you know, paid sick days. We got to keep fighting for healthy and safe work environments for all workers, regardless of gender, but especially for women and BIPOC community members who we know are often grossly underpaid for the same work. You know, that others aren't. So we really have a lot to do in this province, but I think we can do it if we focus on priorities, you know, and the priority should be the people, not making developers richer, which seems to be the government's priority, that and demolishing our environment. But that's a whole other episode.
That's a whole other rant, but you know what? Next time you come on, we'll rant about that.
There you have it.
Jill, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks a lot, Claire. I appreciate it.
Care.
This has been Late Night in Canada. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Unless Ho Canada comes out on iTunes, in which case you'll see me as I'm slowly lowered into my grave. Good night!
Letting gym owners decide what's allowed in order to bring their clients back is like putting lions in charge of zoo safety. Great for the lions, terrible for me, trying to escape the... Hi.